And welcome to the Recombobulation Area. My name is Dan Shafer. Thank you for joining us. Before we get things going, I want to first mention that this episode is sponsored by the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. They are hosting rallies across the state on Thursday, June 4th. Check out our maps, our say to learn more, or you can keep listening here because our guests today are part of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign and the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. Please welcome iuscely Flores and Nicole Gabrail. iuscely and Nicole, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the Recombobulation Area.
Thank you so much for having us. Are my cats being a distraction back there, or is this okay?
No, the cats are great. I welcome the cats for those who are viewing this on YouTube or on our Substack video. Nicole's going to have a couple cats in the background. Maybe we'll make a game out of it, depending on how many times we see them crawling around here.
As soon as I'm on video, that's their cue to start going crazy. So
that's usually what my dog does as well. So if she pops up in the background of mine, we'll just bring all the animals into the podcast here. So obviously there's a lot going on when it comes to redistricting across the country. There's been so much happening with this issue in Wisconsin over, the past couple decades, really. But you all are right on the grassroots with this issue, really talking to voters, working on plans, trying to address this in a variety of different ways. So what has the coalition been doing this last year to talk to voters, to educate voters about redistricting in Wisconsin?
Yeah, if I could go first and then Nicole, please chime in, because Nicole has been a lot of the face of a lot of this work that is talking to volunteers and organizers and community members. But on the back end, for the last 2 years, we've been developing a draft proposal for what an independent redistricting commission could look like, a Wisconsin model per se in Wisconsin. And we turned it into a presentation. And Nicole and a couple of our volunteers through our League of Women Voters ad hoc, not so ad hoc because we have met every single Monday for 2.5 hours for the last 3 years now. The volunteers in that working group.
That's a serious commitment right there.
Truly. And it's all, amazing retired legislators, retired attorneys, retired political science professors from Marquette, amazing women, and just retired teachers, folks that have seen politics in Wisconsin play out and play in their faces, truly, and in their fields of work over the last 40, 50 years now. So these women have been instrumental in helping us create, like I mentioned, a draft proposal for an independent redistricting commission. And Nicole and some volunteers have gotten to take that on tour.
Yeah, so I joined the coalition about a year ago. And by the time I joined, the redistricting committee was just about finished drafting the proposal. So in December is when it was submitted to the Legislative Reference Bureau, and we're still waiting for some feedback from the LRB before we can go ahead and get a bill number. But in the meantime, what we've been doing is moving forward with our public education phase. So that looks like going on tour all across the state. We've had, I think, over 50 presentations at this point, again, all around the state, where we're just talking to Wisconsinites about the issue of gerrymandering and telling them what an independent redistricting commission looks like and what our vision for Wisconsin is and our solution to permanently end gerrymandering in our state.
So what has been some of the feedback that you've gotten from folks as you've been, holding these types of events and talking to people on the ground?
Yeah, so let me just start before the presentation. So as you might know, since 2013, almost every county in Wisconsin has passed either a referendum or a resolution in support of nonpartisan redistricting. And that sentiment is really echoed in what I've heard from people during my presentation. So it feels like to me that whether somebody is completely new to this issue or they've been following it for years and years, everyone can get behind the concept of an independent redistricting commission. It just makes sense to them that the map drawing process needs to be in the hands of a citizen-led commission rather than having politicians draw maps to benefit themselves. And when people understand exactly what the current process in Wisconsin looks like, it's just, they kind of have like this aha moment that it's really like a no-brainer that a nonpartisan process is necessary, safer and fairer, more equitable for everyone.
Yeah, and to I guess reiterate, like people know that something fundamental is broken. When we talk to them, they are more or less looking at us for hope. They are tired of politicians choosing their voters here in Wisconsin instead of them getting to choose their representatives. We hear that a lot. We presented in a town that was gerrymandered, and the apartment complex where one of the volunteers and the constituents lived in was split in half. Their apartment complex was, due to gerrymandering, was split in half. And this is, like letting players referee their own game. And we know that like our solution is going to be, one, making sure that apartment complex is back together, and with the newer, fairer maps that are not long lasting, it did get back together, right? But the long-term approach and the long-term solution ultimately leads to an IRC. And what we're seeing at the national level is people want to do it's the gerrymandering arms race, right? People want to do some sort of mid census redistricting, and we don't blame them, right? We don't blame them. We're tired of getting played with, but this is just saying, let's keep doing this every single time. And what's not to say that that waiting for Congress to do something will end up making it worse, like much worse. And another analogy I like to use is that like every state's different approach is like a patch. Like if you're building a quilt, it's like it's patchwork. And so the ultimate patch is that we create an independent redistricting commission in Wisconsin and act like a model for other states to replicate, because our draft proposal didn't come out of thin air. We, as a visual, we put it on a graph. We put every single state that possibly had anything in relation to some sort of commission. And then we narrowed it down to the states that had the states that had legislators with the most hands-off approach to what would work for Wisconsin. And we hope to then become a state that other states look at and finish building that quilt, and ultimately covering Congress, and then letting Congress then sort of say, all right, we've seen all these states kind of do this. Some states are gerrymandering and will continue to always gerrymander because they're like Republican, and Democrats are going to continue offering solutions for an independent redistricting commission. And it shouldn't be like that. And we recognize at the federal level, something needs to change, but what we can start with is with that one little patch for that larger quilt, which is in Wisconsin.
And I think that's makes sense to me as the approach to take, because so many of these things start small before they can grow into something larger that can, perhaps be the type of thing that would be, a federal solution or whatever it might be. Because clearly the process that, has been playing out over the past several months with this gerrymandering arms race is not benefiting voters in any way. It's been a real problem. And I think, just to go back to what you were saying about Wisconsin, is that what you're talking about and what you've all been working on is a long-term solution. And I think the need for a long-term solution is important because we had, like you said, we have fairer maps, we have newer maps, but that's a temporary solution. And that was a temporary solution based on the fact that we had maps that were not abiding by the state constitution. The state Supreme Court ruled as much in December of 2023. Those new maps were signed into law in February of 2024, but that still doesn't provide a long-term solution for what Wisconsin could do once we reach the time where we should be, going through a redistricting process at the end of the decade. So, what exactly would this Independent Redistricting Commission look like?
Well, it's 19 pages long. So by the time we're done talking here, it'll probably be about 2 hours worth of conversation. But I think ultimately it creates fair districts. It creates fair representation. It creates friendly competition. There are some legislative districts where there's no competition, so people haven't seen their vote actually matter. So they finally get an opportunity to feel at least represented and heard when they go to the polls. And you're right, we're entering a new era here in Wisconsin. And after this fall, the entire legislature will be voted under these fair maps. But I think folks have that effect of like, okay, I saw it on the news in like 2023 that we have new maps. Let them handle it. And like, we are them. Like the people that are handling it are us at the grassroots level, are us trying to educate voters about why their voice should matter, and how they can make sure it matters by having some fair representation.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in and say that the various aspects of this draft proposal were not just taken out of thin air. It's actually based off of how we've seen other states kill their gerrymander. So everything that's part of our draft proposal is something that we've seen other states pull off successfully. And as iuscely likes to say, we've kind of Frankensteined a Wisconsin model.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really
and we finally have a
interesting.
chance to get it right.
There's such an opportunity, and I think it is because of what's happening at the national level. I think it makes it all the more important that work like this is being done at the local level, at the state level, because clearly we're in kind of this quagmire right now at the national level when it comes to congressional redistricting. The new maps that we had for Wisconsin were not at the congressional level, they were for the state legislature. And so we still have the same maps that we, went into place after the whole lease change debacle, that kind of set those baked in previous gerrymandered maps into the next decade of gerrymandered maps. So one of the things that I find interesting about the proposal, and I've did some reporting on this last year, so I'm sure things have evolved since then. But what I think was interesting about it was that the recognition of the kind of the difference between nonpartisan and independent. And I think, the details here do matter, because if you're expecting people to be fully nonpartisan, I think folks will, cynically or not, perhaps say that like nobody can really truly be nonpartisan. And even if you take the power away from like the actual legislators who are drawing that, there's still, a level of partisanship that's going to be at play. But I think recognizing that there is that aspect of it, but still maintaining the independence of the commission, I think is what makes some of these proposals especially interesting. Could you expand on kind of the difference there? I know we're getting into the weeds, but that's what we do here at the recombobulation area.
Yeah, I mean, lucky for us, like we have technology at our disposal, right? So we are able to use tools that can filter out, I guess, the nonpartisan out of the equation easier and focus on things like community of interest, things like keeping districts contiguous, that they're touching each other. If we wanted to make every single district star shaped, we just have to make sure that every single star is touching each other at a point. Like, we have the tools to really get creative with what representation looks like, and really just takes that nonpartisan approach out. And yeah, I think there is some clear fear of like, we all have biases, right? We all have that ability to want to keep power when we finally get power. But you alluded to the history of gerrymandering in Wisconsin is as old as 1970, when Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom was formed. Like, since the 1970s, our maps have always gone to the federal courts, and we're spending taxpayer dollars on these issues constantly up until 2022, when the federal courts were like, "Nuh-uh, take it back." But it's been decades of federal decision making for a state like Wisconsin. And then all of our taxpayer dollars being spent on legal battles constantly. And if we were able to set the foundation for this to stop, and for folks to recognize that at the core, like, we all want our basic needs met. And Republicans and Democrats right now are never gonna like agree on what the basic needs look like unless we, as people, come together to push for one, better representation at the legislative level and congressional level, but two, like to be heard finally through some sort of nonpartisan independent redistricting model. And like language, that's my argument too, is that language changes. We went from a nonpartisan approach to an independent approach, but we continue to use the word and gerrymander, a word as old as 1810, which means our system has been broken since 1810. I say this often, and Nicole could attest, but every time that I tell folks that there isn't a word for gerrymandering in Spanish, when we've given this presentation to folks that speak Spanish, and we say, we're going to talk to you about how politicians manipulate voting maps and how your vote is manipulated after every census, people's just the aha moment of like, what? Like, I can't believe this. And I think it's the same thing with using the word gerrymander. Like the same thing happens when you use an overarching word like gerrymandering, because it normalizes what is happening. And so what we want to do is to kind of bring more light to that and normalize an independent redistricting commission, or at least the language for fair representation.
And I just really want to say that your point about, how partisan bias can impact the outcome of the commission, that relates to one of the first questions you asked, is what are we hearing during these presentations? And that's a really, really common question that I get asked. Like even people who are really new to this issue, that's kind of where they start with, well, how do you address the possibility of partisan bias affecting the outcome of the commission? And that's a really important question because we need to look at this realistically, right? Like I'll always, I'll die on the hill that an independent redistricting commission is the way to go for Wisconsin. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? You have to look at things realistically. Humans are fallible, and we all have our own internal biases that we need to overcome. So I just want to, reiterate my point earlier that the various aspects of this draft proposal are borrowed from other states' independent redistricting commissions. And that includes various mechanisms to make sure that the maps that the commission draws are as non-biased and nonpartisan as possible. So that includes something like having an equal number of Democrats, Republicans, and minor party voters in the commission. So equal parts there. And then also kind of like a system of checks and balances. So if they are going to pass the maps, they need to have people from all sides of the political spectrum that agree to it. It can't just be one or two commissioners or three commissioners all on the Democratic side or all on the Republican side. There needs to be cross-party agreement in order for a decision to be made.
Yeah, and we suggest like statistical weighting. So we recognize that there might be many applications coming in from like young, eager college students out of Madison, or young, eager college students out of anywhere really. And so we recognize that we know that the demographic mix that might come in when applicants apply won't be won't reflect the state's population, but maybe too many applicants are men or too many applicants are women. That's where that statistical weighing comes in. And it's just adjusting how much each applicant counts before they're considered, into the pool of like the 240 and then narrowing it down. And again, we are just these suggestors. We also suggest experts that have done this in the past, and all of that is sort of in the like indentation of the work, or in the like appendix of like, here is where all of this data came from, and here are all the experts that we consulted with that suggested these models to work. So we kind of just compiled it. All we had to do was do the research and just put it into a suggested document, and truly hope for the best for Wisconsin.
Well, it's a really thoughtful process that you're all engaging in, and I think that's really important from it too, because there's going to be so much that I'm sure you already have learned and will continue to learn as you share some of these ideas. And, that's part of what you're all working on for the rallies that you're hosting coming up here as well. So those are on Thursday, June 4th. Locations include Madison, Milwaukee, Appleton, Menominee, Janesville, Kenosha, and Racine, Greene County, Wausau, Sheboygan, and more. That's a lot of cities. That's a lot. This is a big deal. So tell us about what is happening on Thursday, June 4th with these rallies.
Yeah, we want to make our demands clear. We know that at the national level, voting rights are under attack. So we want to show solidarity, one, with all of the states that are going to end up gerrymandered, unfortunately. We recognize that we are not going to be as dramatically affected, but our neighbors are, and our friends are in those respective states. We also want to reiterate that we've been celebrating across the state for the last year. So June will mark a year since we've been on tour. 48 different cities with a team of 5 people is not like an easy feat. So I'm really glad that we were able to do this. And we are moving on to what we would call phase 2, which is legislative advocacy. Candidates have to turn in their pledges before June 4th or their campaign papers before June 4th. So we want to amplify that. Now it's our chance. Like, we plan to ask every single candidate, regardless of whatever political party they affiliate with, to support an independent redistricting commission.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing, and I think it's really important that this is not just happening in one place or another. That these are happening all over the state, and when you work on this type of issue in different corners of the state, do you get different reactions from people asking different questions, people commenting differently, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, we do. So in Menominee, IE, which is about 30 minutes away from Minnesota, like, they get their local news from Minnesota. So it's really hard to get there. One, it's really hard to be more visual there. If we didn't have the opportunity to connect with folks in Menominee, IE, we wouldn't know what they're up to. And so they really do get a lot of their local news. So it's really hard for competition to happen there, for folks that don't have big budgets that are running for office to beat those huge ads. And that's what we heard in Menominee, and in Eau Claire, we get the same thing because they're so close. But then you get closer to Marshfield, and Marshfield was split into 4 districts too, and so we just do hear different things from voters all the time. And Nicole's been on the ground, so I hope you can add more.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what you said, iuscely, in that it depends a lot on the audience's personal experience with gerrymandering. So we do hear a lot of personal stories from people, but also there is there's a shared concern throughout the whole state about what is happening on a national level. So people are always bringing up, of course, the gerrymandering arms race, and then also this recent recent Supreme Court decision that was made, Louisiana versus v. Calais. And people have a lot of, they're very fearful that this recent decision is going to dilute minority voting power. And I think, if there's any upside to this mess that's going on nationally, it's that it kind of has reignited people's desire for a fair process that can guarantee fair voting maps for the whole state.
Yeah, it's one of those issues that we see, in the news, and there can be this a little bit of a disconnect where it's just it's a confusing issue at times because different states have different rules. There are different ways that people can go about doing this. States with, divided government like Wisconsin might not be in a position like, of state with a red trifecta or a blue trifecta or whatever it might be to address some of these issues. But, Wisconsin, I mean, we're not going to be less of a purple state anytime soon here, right? And I think, efforts like this reflect that we need a fairer process to address these things because 2030 is going to be here before we know it. And I think it is going to be incumbent on folks in the Wisconsin state legislature, folks in Congress, to recognize what has happened over the past year or so here with this gerrymandering arms race and recognize that this is an unsustainable process. And I get really discouraged sometimes by some of the chatter around this by saying that it will always be partisan and there's all each party is always going to act in their own self-interest and I think we do see certain examples of that, certainly, but I think at the end of the day I think most people who are seeing this unfold are seeing how this is just not a process that can continue in the way that it is. It needs to be addressed, whether it's from federal legislation or from the grassroots level at the state and local level, like what you're all working on here in Wisconsin. So if there are folks who are listening to this podcast, who are finding out about your events, who might want to get involved, what's one way that they could do that?
They could go to fairmapswe.com, so fairmapswi.com. We have an icon that pops up right away as soon as they join or enter the website, and it has a lineup of all of our rallies. They can also read the draft proposal for themselves and submit comment. And trust me, we review those comments every Monday, 2.5 hours. We go through every single comment because we value all the feedback that we get. And you can sign our pledge to support calling your legislator or calling or going to a town hall where there might be a candidate forum and asking all candidates if they support an independent redistricting commission. And something that gives me a little hope is that I think a year ago, if you would have gotten 10 people together on the street and you asked them if they knew what gerrymandering was, I don't think the 10 would be able to answer without like chat GPTing it. And now I feel more confident to say that if maybe we grab 10 people on the street and we ask them, I hope that like three or four of the 10 would know because of this whole national, I guess, discombobulation that's going on.
There you go. Well, this is a good place to get recombobulated, of course, in these discombobulating times. And we'll stay tuned to all of the different channels, social media and newsletters and whatnot that you're all sharing the information about these rallies coming up, the Our Maps RSA rallies across Wisconsin, Thursday, June 4th. Any other big picture thoughts before we wrap things up here?
So I just want to do a little callback to something that you said earlier, which is, I forgot what the exact quote was, but politicians are going to act in favor of their own party. It was something like that. And I just want to point out that an IRC is how we force them to stop doing that, to stop acting based on their own personal agenda and their party agenda. Because when we have fair maps, that's how politicians are held accountable. When they're able to gerrymander safe seats for themselves, then they no longer have to be responsive to the needs and the wants of their constituents. But under fair maps, then they know that they actually need your vote. So they'll need to pass the types of legislations that the majority of their constituents favor instead of just going with whatever their donors or their party says. So this is the way we force our politicians to take action.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I think it's a really important issue. And I would encourage folks to get in touch and find out more and be part of one of these rallies if you have the opportunity. Again, that is on Thursday, June 4th, rallies across the state. Iuscely and Nicole, thank you so much for joining us here at the Recombobulation Area.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.